This is my second conversation with Stefan Lorenzutti, a poet who runs the independent press Bored Wolves in collaboration with his partner, Joanna Osiewicz-Lorenzutti. Stefan and I were messaging a few months back, and he shared that it had been a challenging year, and how responses from when we last talked would no longer be quite the same. So, in a way, we talked about many of the same big picture questions, but this time with a focus on what it means to publish 50 books in 50 months, interacting with respect, trust, grace, and forgiveness, and appreciation of the details and stories behind process. Here's my conversation with Stefan. I'm thrilled to welcome you back. I'm so happy to have a chance to catch up with you, Stefan.
Well, I mean, thank you for the invitation to continue the conversation was tremendously exciting. I think it was when I was re-listening to our conversation from last April, I think, or March it was, so over a year. And because I periodically post about it for people who didn't know me actually then, and because I do think, as with all of your interviews, they're evergreens. But then it's also interesting listening. I realized that a lot of things had not changed, but that it had been quite a challenging year and for the press. And so it's interesting how many answers would have been slightly different based on, another 15 months having passed, another 15 months of trying to figure this all out.
So, but maybe just briefly talk a little bit about Bored Wolves for people who may not have listened to the first episode of us speaking together, so that they just have some context for who you are and what kind of work you do.
Right. So Bored Wolves, we are an independent press. It's run by myself, Stefan Lorenzutti, poet, and my co-publisher and partner, Joanna Osiewicz-Lorenzutti. And we're kind of like a Swiss Army knife team. We've worked on over 100 books together, freelance, non-Bored Wolves books. So those are books for museums and artist books, working with independent artists and galleries. And Bored Wolves was kind of always the dream, but we sort of had never had time for it. And then eventually we made time for it while living on top of a mountain in the Polish Highlands. And it was actually up there on the mountain that we began expanding the press, working with authors and artists and designers from, I think, more than 20 countries at this point. We were doing it in our spare time still. We work full-time jobs. Actually, Joanna works basically 2 full-time jobs. And we have 2 boisterous young daughters with very creative, very operatic personalities. And we were doing it while homeschooling. And then we moved back to Krakow, to the city, so that they could have somewhat more formal educational experience. So somehow in all of this, we're now about to do our 50th publication in 50 months, which was not really part of the plan, but has just kind of happened thanks to a certain amount of insanity, which I think I referred to last time, and collective experience that we have, but also a certain form of adrenaline, I think, too. This impetus to bring books into the world, shepherding them in collaboration with our collaborators, who we collaborate with. Books that in many cases might not otherwise exist. We're never like bidding on a manuscript or something. They're usually the outgrowth of just conversations I have with people whose work I'm interested in. Now we're at this point where we have a catalog of, it's going to be 54 books in a couple weeks. And it's going to pretty quickly after that expand to 60 books. And that was never part of the plan. To have a catalog of 60 books while also continuing to develop books. And then the other responsibilities one has to authors and artists, and just the sheer logistics of it. And we're in over 100 bookstores in 30 something countries, and most of them don't report sales. So we do a lot of detective work. And then the postal aspect of it. So it's kind of really grown into this, I don't want to say monster, or it's a monster, but it's a monster that we get along with and mostly trust. but that could also devour us one day if it goes really primal.
So, well, congratulations on the success of the endeavor, that it's just
You,
taken off and you have so many people who come to you to have their books created with you. It's a great testament to you and Joanna and the work that you're doing. So that's wonderful. In our back and forthing before having our conversation today, I think what stood out for me is the tension that you were feeling around being able to maintain a relationship of trust, that people trust you to do the best work you can with them, and the intimate collaboration, the deep, meaningful connections that you make with the artists and writers that you're working with, to be able to hold that as something very precious while working like runaway horses on 50 books in 50 months. How do you balance that tremendous real success with giving every author and every artist you're collaborating with all the attention and respect and quality work that you can? And I can relate to it a little bit, but I think you're even more than me. You've taken off. So how you balance all those things, I'd love you to talk about that.
I cartwheeled off a cliff. First of all, I love that you use the word respect, and that is, I think, one of the founding words going back to when started expanding Board Wolves. For years, Board Wolves was just my own poetry, but then when we made that dream shift to publishing other poets and then working with artists, respect was core. And there is an element of starting Board Wolves that resulted from a really painfully negative publishing experience I had as an author. When I arrived in Poland, I had written this children's picture book manuscript called The Ocean Tamer about a boy based on my younger self on the coast of Cape Cod, engaging in these primal, sort of mythological, in my 8, 9-year-old mind, battles with the tide, sort of throwing myself against the waves and clashing with them. I wrote the story called The Ocean Tamer children's picture book actually when I was in college briefly. And I dropped out and I went back home to New York and I had this manuscript, The Ocean Tamer. And I don't want to spend too much time on, but basically it mattered a lot to me and it still matters a lot to me 20 years later. One day I wrote to a well-known children's picture book artist here in Europe. I won't go into any of the details because I am honorable. And I wrote to this artist out of the blue. I admired her work. And somehow crazily it ended up that she read the manuscript. We actually had to translate it for her because she didn't read English. And she said, I will do this. Anyway, fast forward, it was like a 7 or 8 year process actually, with her kind of illustrating on the sides of other projects. And the book was finished and it was beautiful. And it would have been so beautiful. Her artwork was, I mean, it really touched me to the core. She kind of understood that boy that I was. And we started working with the publishers around Europe. Her books are often published in co-editions in many countries, Italy and France and Poland and Spain. And we then started having some issues with the publishers delaying the project, including in one case because she had another book with a writer who's won the Nobel Prize. So the publisher decided to delay our book so it wouldn't come out at the same time. And we then had a falling out. And it's one of the very few falling outs I've had, but we had a falling out about how to proceed. And I sent a rash email saying, okay, I think this is over, which I regretted, imperfect human over here. And she took it very literally and said, okay, that's it. And then ended up taking the drawings, writing her own text, and publishing the book as something else. So the drawings that were made for my story as another book. And that's a whole other discussion. There was no contract. We had a falling out. I wrote a stupid email, you know. But from that experience, and also the publisher who published the book was somebody that actually I knew professionally. And it was just a disastrous experience for me. I said with Board Wolves, I never, ever, ever want to have any of our authors feel an iota of what I felt. And also in a position of where there was a power imbalance because she was well known and established and I wasn't, but also from speaking with other friends who are authors and just sort of the ways in which they had felt inherently disrespected, not even perhaps intentionally, but just the publisher had sort of diminished their feelings. Feelings are real, right? And so I committed to, I will never be guilty of nothing else, that I don't want anyone working with Board Wolves to ever feel that I had not taken their feelings seriously. And this was also in terms of things like responsiveness, which is like in any collaboration, it's such a fundamental thing. How long it takes to be written back to reply to emails. I think we're all struggling with this constantly. Apologies for this belated reply is probably one of the most common utterances. And so I was just like, I want to do better than I saw these established presses do. Fast forward, if I had to grade myself, I think I'd sort of give myself an incomplete in some ways because we've had so many projects and because I took on so many. Sarah, I went too far. I went overboard. I will admit this. I think there was some hyperactive element to it, but it was just the projects we were getting and the people who were coming to us with projects, our dear collaborators and people who I was inspired by, and just how easy it became to initiate meaningful collaborations. All of a sudden, we had this pipeline of like 30, 40, 50 projects. And we've now done 50 books in 50 months, and there's still another 30 projects in the pipeline. And it's all connected. I do strongly feel that every individual Board Wolves book is self-contained to a degree that someone could find that book and never find another Board Wolves book, and that's okay. But if they find a few at a bookstore, say, that it will make sense that everything is sort of connected. And you don't even have to know who I am or anything about my brain or what inspires me to kind of, I hope, intuit that interconnectedness. And this is a pretty good actually example of, because in talking about this, I've totally lost my train of thought just thinking about like the sheer number of projects. But along the way, basically, my responsiveness level suffered seriously, also because we're doing it in our spare time. Some folks have written to me, and I realized that not authors, but people inquiring about like if they could send a manuscript my way. And from how they write, I realized that they think that we have multiple full-time employees in some sort of loft office with 5 interns. And it's like, it's mostly the 2 of us in our apartment with 2 daughters and the chaos of Lego and maiming ourselves on Playmobil while going to fetch some books to package them and ship them. And here's sort of the point, was like, I've not wanted to use all the excuses that I could use to excuse being slow with replies that I want to send, but I just get overwhelmed. I haven't wanted to use those excuses because I said, we are publishing though. And these authors have a right to expect that we will hold ourselves to a standard as if we were working full time, as if we had an office full of interns. And so I feel like sometimes I've been an A- on that, and sometimes I've been a B-, and sometimes I've been a D. And I always feel like we've done right by our authors in the end, but there definitely have been stretches where like, I'm kind of screwing this up. Or I know I can do better, a lot better. So yeah.
I mean, I understand that you're holding yourself to that standard, and I think that's a wonderful goal. But I suspect that anybody who does work with you and gets to know you understands that there's also life happening, that we all, at various points, I will say for myself, take on more than I actually am capable of doing. But I'm hopeful that in most cases where it's connections with people, that they understand sort of a little bit about who I am, and I
Right.
understand a little bit about who they are. They show me grace, and I appreciate that. I also don't want to abuse that. But there's like We go forward with the best of intentions. I think people who know you, Stefan, know that you have the best of intentions and you deliver on them every time you can and you don't make excuses. And we all recognize that shit happens and it's
Yeah.
okay. Like, you don't lose that trust, you don't lose that respect straight away. I think it is also on us to show grace to each other in those moments to say, yeah, he's doing the best that he can and he's going to get back to me. It's okay. It's okay.
Well, that's really, it means a lot to hear, Sarah. And I also, another word that you use that is so key here is grace. Full disclosure, I do use excuses, but
Excuses are actually sometimes it's the reason why something didn't happen. It's got a bad rap, but it
yeah,
actually is the reason why something didn't happen.
a
So
lot of crazy stuff has happened. So I think the excuses have been some really good ones. But um, yeah, so how do you get the book into people's hands? Like, how do you get it into what I always call a paper cut existence? Like, to actually get the book so that they're inflicting paper cuts. And every so often, when I'm getting overwhelmed by stuff, and then like some sort of connection, something will thread together in all sorts of surprising, fun ways across all these endeavors. And I was re-listening to your conversation, Vulnerability and Life, in our conversation with Molly Ruskar from Zurich, who I met at a Volumes art book fair in Zurich. And it was wonderful. You two got into the details about also things like shellac and really into her process. And so I find processes fascinating. That doesn't actually come up enough, or I think we often know too little about the books that we're holding or the paintings that we're standing in front of, or whatever it is, because there's so many great stories behind how stuff gets made, and how the wheels did not come off in Endeavor, because it's so easy for the wheels to come off. And I think falling outs, which are very painful, can happen way easier than the years it takes to build trust. So like, how does stuff actually materialize? And the crazy serendipitous stuff that happens along the way.
I sometimes some conversations go deeper into those processes and things of production and I worry sometimes that it goes a bit too far for some people who may not be interested in that kind of
Mm.
stuff. I am, but I also think that there's a lot of humanness that's sort of entwined in the so it's not really just talking about shellac. It is about shellac, but it's also about why is she using shellac and what is it about shellac that is particularly meaningful for her and her craft, and why does she care about that so much, and you see so much of her passion. But if we hadn't talked about shellac, it wouldn't have come out because it's all tightly wound together. So those conversations I do find super fun when people get into the weeds of their stuff, and then you see the look on their faces and they're getting all excited, and you're like, this is great. I love this.
Yeah, when I met Molly, we were sitting next to each other, and actually, Molly's become very significant to me. Hi, Molly. She was sitting next to me. I think she was whittling, and she was doing something with awls, awls, I think, and she had holes in her sweater, and the sweater was beautifully darned. It was like a work of art, and she was like, "Oh, the holes are because of the awls, or because of the whittling," and I love that. And then I wrote a poem actually about the holes in Molly's sweater, and it's a poem that I haven't published, but it's a really important one to me because it's about doing, and it's about just sort of how working on something with great passion, and you end up with holes in your sweater, and I love that. And then they're darned, and it becomes a work of art. And so anyway, all that sort of stuff excites me, and that could all result from a conversation sitting on two benches next to each other. That's why I'm just so, as tired as I am, and I am tired, I'm exhausted, but I'm just trying to keep getting out into the world, keep getting the books out into the world. I'm really excited that I think the majority of Boardwell's books selling around the world are being discovered by people who've never heard of me, who don't need to know who I am. But I also want to keep getting myself out into the world, especially as an inherently shy person, so that those sorts of encounters are made possible. Can I actually trace back a little bit the encounter with Molly to
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
like, but to try and do kind of I'll do like a brisk version of it, because that was at Volumes in Zurich. That fair is very significant to me. I call Zurich our kind of home away from home because we were living on the mountain and I was publishing a little book called Kitchen. It's our littlest book and it's drawings by Ingo Giesendunner, drawings of his kitchen table, colored pencil. Ingo was one of my heroes going back to when I was 19. I dropped out of college, went back to New York, and I was at, I believe it was the Museum of Modern Art bookstore, and I found a book by Ingo called Urban Recordings. And it was a big, gloriously thick volume of Ingo wherever he goes, he's sketching in his moleskin with pen and ink. And it was him going around the world and drawing cities he'd been in. And I got that book and it blew my mind open. And it showed me the way that you could make a book and it could be so substantive. Ingo makes books the Ingo way. He's following no rules except his own quite stringent internal rules. And he does have rules because I think his ancestors are Protestant or something. He explained to me once. Anyway, that somehow means that he has his internal code of Ingo. Ingo became a hero to me. I was 19 years old. We eventually started corresponding. We became good old-fashioned pen pals. And then one day, Ingo started posting colored pencil drawings, and I don't think anyone had ever seen. I hadn't seen them. A lot of people who I spoke to, who've known Ingo's work for decades, didn't know that he had this superpower of being able to draw in colored pencils so beautifully. I wrote to Ingo, and we were both like, "This is the book. This is the collaboration." So 18 years after, as a dropout, discovering his books, did the book with Ingo, and then Ingo was going to release it in Zurich, and we were printing the book, and we were going to send it to him. But we didn't know if we could get it in time because of Swiss customs. We were worried that, and we could do a whole podcast about my adventures with customs goons. And so Joanna, my co-publisher, was like, "You're going to have to fly to Switzerland, like next week." So we quickly bought a ticket. The book is small, so I was able to fit 100 in my rucksack. And I flew to hand deliver the books to Ingo and to smuggle the books past Swiss customs. There, I said it. I'm joking, but I'm not. But I am. But I'm not. And got the books, and we did this release, and it was wonderful. And I was staying with, when I was a teenager, my hero, staying in his apartment, and there was the table that is in the book. Everything is drawn on the table that I was then sitting at with the book, and it was really quite mind exploding. And Ingo was like, "This weekend, there's actually this book fair called Volumes. Maybe you can do it." And they let me in at the last second. And I literally came from the mountain. The Polish phrase is to have straw in your boots. So I came from the mountain. Nobody knew who the hell I was. Nobody had heard of Board Wolves. We had never done a fair. So much happened that I could actually spend an hour talking about what happened in 4 of those 8 hours in Zurich. 4 of our books came from people I met. That just so much happened. I met other people who were heroes when I was a teenager. And that led to me returning to Zurich every year and eventually meeting Molly. But the last thing I'll say, and I just want to emphasize, like, just when you start doing stuff, you really never know where it's going to go. Next to Ingo's couch on that trip, there was a zine by an Egyptian artist, Noran Mayouf. She had been in Switzerland studying. She met Ingo at a zine fair and gave him this zine, which was about Egyptian youth, their culinary rituals during lockdown. I read that zine on Ingo's guest bed. I was like, "This is so great." I wrote to Noran. We became friends. Eventually, we started working on a project together, which we just published last month. It's this book. It's this hybrid sci-fi post-apocalyptic picture book by Noran. This book that we worked on with Noran, who's in Cairo, the book is now on its way to Egypt. It all goes back to that one copy of the zine next to Ingo's guest bed, which all goes back to me discovering Ingo's book when I was 19. And it is all connected, and it's all wild, and it all makes sense.
There's a lot there. There's a lot there in that story.
Hope everyone out there is taking notes. There will be a pop-quiz at the end.
But the thread I want to pick up on is that one of, and you said it a couple of times, getting out in the world and having those encounters that you could never have anticipated. You didn't know were going to happen, but you're putting yourself in the places where things like that can happen. So you put yourself out there and see not just what publishers are doing, but like that artist or that, book fair, or that all those different things happening around you that strike off all of those ideas and exciting sparks that you could never have known were going to happen. And then I think what we do is you take it back in and then you kind of hibernate again, or that's what I do, is hibernate again and have my vision of what I'm doing. And again, I push the world out I do my thing and then surface again and look around and go, oh, what else is going on out here?
Yeah. Yeah, that hibernation. I would love to actually have a roundtable about laziness also, because I think there's during those periods of hibernating, I sometimes I actually feel really lazy. Like we've done 50 books in 50 months, but I feel and I've actually started writing about it because I it's not really laziness as it's used as a pejorative. I hope I'm using pejorative correctly, but laziness as like just giving yourself a chance to absorb all of this good stuff that you absorb, but it's almost too much, and kind of letting things germinate and sort themselves out on a certain level. I have found that I need to put myself out there, which is that's not my comfort zone. I've always been quite shy and introverted, and I'm sort of amazed actually that I kind of shoved myself out into the in the deep end, but I didn't make a decision to. I wasn't like this will be good for me. Really, I haven't recovered from having to quickly jump on a flight to Switzerland with those 100 books in my backpack. Like I really mean that. I haven't caught my breath since, and that's probably a good thing because I think the less I think about the sort of the big picture and notions of I think that great human folly legacy, that's not good for me. That's not productive in any way, shape, or form. So just to keep pushing myself off the deep end, including when there might not be any water in the pool. But I'll say this: I get a ton of emails and messages from folks saying that they want to start presses, and I don't really think I know much about anything, but I do know that you got to just start. I realize we'll never have all the resources we'll need, and I was influenced by being in the Polish Highlands, where everyone like none of the farmers are farming like nobody buys a new tractor. The tractors actually in the Highlands of Poland, they're kind of famous for being these Frankenstein's monsters, but in a beautiful way. They're put together from like 5 old tractors. That was very inspiring. In addition to having generations of immigrants in my family, where you figure stuff out and are scrappy, knowing like we'll never have all the resources we need. So we didn't have the money to do what we needed. And somehow we kind of figured it out, still trying to figure it out, especially now. But that's a whole other discussion. But just starting and also realizing as a writer, I believe I spoke last time about that I was sort of an unhappy poet, but I'm a happy publisher, even if overwhelmed. And so a big part of that was like realizing I wasn't going to wake up to a magic email, and I just had to start doing stuff myself. And it's interesting because 50 books later, I still don't really get magic emails. Like I'll get something that excites me, but it's still after 50 books, like you got to just generate your own momentum. And I'm grateful that within the context of Bored Wolves, it has been very easy, actually, easy in a good way. Easy as in you don't need everything lined up. You just need a shared mutual sparks. I love that you use the word sparks also, that there's sparks in both directions with, let's say, an artist or a poet. But it's interesting, like it's simultaneously easy, but also I realize that if I don't keep doing that, it's possible nothing will happen. We have to keep making books and getting the books out into the world, and putting myself out there, because otherwise it's really easy to have like I don't like parties generally, but I like pity parties, and I throw a pretty good one. I always enjoy myself. It's so easy to do, like we've done 50 books and still like I'm more in the role of having to generate that momentum, but realizing I think it's always going to be that way. And maybe that's okay. Some things have gotten easier, but yeah, I think that's an important realization. Not to really let up, but just to let up enough to keep things sustainable, but not to ever think it's going to get again that magic email or message will show up in the morning. And maybe it does, but don't count on it. Yeah.
What do you mean by magic email?
I think back then it would be a gatekeeper writing to say welcome inside. You're one of us now. And sending something to the New Yorker, and they're like, yeah, we want you to be part of this. That's what I think I would describe the magic email, and especially connected to specifically to gatekeepers and these sort of pedigreed realms. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I still struggle with a little bit, is just that external validation that somebody other than me has said this has value. I think this is cool. And it's
Right.
somebody in a position who can actually then help put that idea out into the world. Probably, I think, better than I can.
What's
But
your position on chips on shoulders?
chips on shoulders? Oh, I've
Having
got
on
lots. One.
it's like slate. I've got like slate.
Yeah,
I
there's
try and keep 8% of my motivation. I think more than 8% would be bad. It could become toxic. But I try and keep 8%. I'm going to show you all.
I'll show you. I was about to say that. I'll show you. I can do this. You'll have to notice me now.
Right. And then when you, yeah, anyway, I'm going to try and, yeah, I'm going to try it again. Try and focus on being an honorable human. And yeah, because we all have falling outs, but it's complicated. Sometimes takes years, but I've definitely seen have evidence that it's possible to move past, yeah, some of those ruptures.
Yeah, and show each other some grace, like we said before, because I'm thinking a lot right now about what are some of the more mechanical aspects of our experiences that can be handled in mechanical ways, but what are the human qualities that cannot be imitated by mechanical means? And
Right.
and I think, respect and trust and grace and forgiveness are among those things. Because if you make a tally and you just say, oh, well, on this side of the ledger, Stefan wrote a rash email, and so then the rational response is to say, I'm going to take those words literally, and that's it, rupture full, and we'll move on.
Right.
That's a mechanical response. And a human response, and it can take time, like you said, it can take time. We're all imperfect humans. So nobody can say, I never sent an email like that, right? Or I never responded to somebody badly, or I was never cruel to somebody. We all have been, right? And so then how do you distinguish yourself other than saying, but Stefan was going through something. And I've written a million emails like that. Maybe I even wrote one for him, but I didn't send it, or something that we all recognize, that we give him some space to be human and say, naughty Stefan, that hurt my feelings. She could say that and say that really hurt my feelings. But I understand.
No, absolutely. And I didn't insult anyone's grandparents, which I think, like,
That's good. I'm happy to hear that. That's good.
ancestors should be left out of this stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know why that makes me think right now, but I feel like I haven't seen in a while, although maybe I just missed them. I haven't seen any dancing reels, Stefan dancing in a while.
Yeah. Well, the dancing I got a little self-conscious about, but it was interesting because when I started posting the because the dance is integral to my creative processes, especially when I get stuck. And I did theater stuff and dance stuff going way back, but I hadn't for a long time. And when I started posting the dance reels, me up in the attic, trying not to concuss myself on the rafters, some friends wrote to me. They were concerned. They were like, "Are you okay?" Because it seemed like I was, like I was losing my marbles and I was going through some crisis. And I told them, I said, it's not weird that I'm posting dance videos now. It's weird that I wasn't before. That's actually that should have been the more concerning. So yeah, yeah, but the movement has been really key, especially because I think this is sort of another conversation, but like also where as one as a poet and making as a publisher, like where do you get your dopamine from and stuff? And like I don't necessarily get it with a lot of the processes that I do. And so sometimes the dancing actually that's the thing that catalyzes a whole bunch of work getting done with some with gusto and flair, let's say. Yeah.
Everybody will have different ways of getting at that. But again, I think that's a superhuman thing, is the fact of movement, free movement or whatever. For me, it's spin classes and running and anything that gets my body moving in that way, maybe a little bit more controlled than the dancing, but it definitely loosens up the screws in my head and helps me come up with different ways of seeing things or thinking about things or brand new ideas or whatever it might be. But yeah, I would love to see more. I'm not going to put any pressure on you, But if you want to put some dance videos out there, I'll know that Stefan's actually okay, as opposed to not seeing them. And I'm like, why is he not doing that anymore? Does he feel like he shouldn't take the time to do it? Does he not really have the time to do it? Is he judging whether he should be doing that and not be doing something else? I went the opposite of your friends.
Judging,
Oh no.
judging. He sprained his spiritual ankle.
Yeah.
Um, I think for me, the dancing and also the drawing, which I've started using charcoal and drawing for the first time in decades, drawing with intention, waking up at dawn excited to draw something. And the charcoal, which is also about movement, and especially because when I draw, it's, I would say, 33.3% with the charcoal sort of like striking the page, and then 33% I'm drawing with my fingertips, and 33.3, sorry, percent I'm drawing with the eraser actually in charcoal. And it's all about movement, and but also there's that element in terms of vulnerability, is sharing things, especially, for example, a lot of people that I follow and that I'm close to are artists, and so sharing drawings and the dance, because a lot of people I know are also dancers, and they're trained and they actually know what they're doing. And not being a hypocrite, because one of the things I'm very proud of with Board Wolf's catalog is we've published a lot of, for example, books by poets of their drawings, because I found out, oh, wow, you draw, and it's important to you, and you have all these sketchbooks, or an artist who actually wrote poetry. Sometimes convincing them to get out of their comfort zone, especially when there's great pressure, often, especially like in the art world, to specialize on one thing. You need to be good at one thing. And so when you hear like art historians and stuff saying Cartier-Bresson, when he stopped photography and he just wanted to draw and his drawings aren't as good as his photographs, and I'm like, you have missed the point, you overeducated. Okay, not gonna use the word I was gonna use. Yeah, so I've often kind of strongly encouraged people to be like, they're like, but I'm not a writer. And I'm like, I don't care. You wrote something that's really strong text. You are therefore by definition a writer. And then I myself am kind of cowardly in this regard. So I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
The drawings are great. You're right though. There may be I haven't been seeing the dance videos, but I have been seeing the drawings.
I'm
And I
dancing on paper.
dancing on paper, and it makes sense. Charcoal, it's my favorite medium, and I like it because it's super messy. And sometimes I've taken drawing classes where the teachers are like, oh, you have to draw the bean and you have to, and don't smear it, and like be careful, and you should be using your charcoal, not your hands. And I'm like, yeah, okay, well, I appreciate the guidance and I am in your class, so I'm listening. But if I feel like what I want to do is like smear that, it's like give it some energy like that with my hand, I'm gonna kind of do that because that's what
A
feels
core Board Wolves artist, author, poet. I keep using this word core a lot, but it's an important one for me. Katie Bentel. We were talking about charcoal recently, and she had taken a break from charcoal because she said it was a little bit too dusty at that moment. But we were talking about it, and she was like, if you're keeping things clean with charcoal, you're doing something wrong. She was like, you have to get messy, because I'm very finicky because I draw on a table that I like to keep clean. And she was like, you need to find another table.
Yeah, no, I mean, when I was younger and I thought I wanted to go into architecture, so I took a drawing class and I kept that first sketchbook from a billion years ago, because also to remind me that I was drawing with like ruler and pencil.
Mm,
I remember drawing like these French doors that were open, so like every single line, and I wasn't measuring with the ruler, but I was like making sure the lines are straight. And then like I'm just looking at this, but like in the last drawing class I did, whatever. I'm more like this now. This is like a dung beetle, but like
that
or
is awesome.
I did him with ink, right? But it's just messy and he's a dung beetle, right?
He's the
So
most memorable dung beetle
but
that
that's
I've ever encountered.
but that's more I realized, but it took me time to get to where I'm like, actually, you're not a pencil and ruler drawer. You're a charcoal, messy brush ink kind of, jar. And I didn't know that.
Right.
I didn't know that. And it took me decades to figure that out. And now I'm very happy, right? I
Yeah.
don't draw enough though. You're inspiring me in many ways, Stefan, but in one way, it's like I gotta draw this weekend. I gotta get the charcoals out and I gotta do some things.
But you're saying this with literally in the background. I've been so interested in all of these drawings and
A few
collages in
things.
the background. It's actually like a halo of work. So there is work on the wall. And I do the same. Everything gets taped up, poems too. I work on floorboards and walls
Nice.
during also editing and development processes. So I love seeing things up on the wall.
It's a new thing. I had years and years and years worth of drawings just rolled up in tubes in the closet. And I pulled everything out. I'm like, it's going in the garbage, or it's going in recycling, or it's going on the wall. And so I threw out tons and tons of stuff. I didn't want to be precious about anything. I'm like, but if something really caught me, like that one, the top one up there of the woman is my favorite drawing of all time. That's just like, it made me really happy. So she's up there. She's sort of the queen at the top of the at the top of the halo. Everything else is kind of,
Yeah. Yeah, I think
um,
that probably a very large percentage of the history of board wolves in terms of development it's been on walls and floorboards. Like I think to write the history of board wolves, one would need to know all the floors that I've lived upon and danced upon.
I just had this vision. It'd be a really cool installation piece if you took one room somewhere and made it the history of board wolves, but like have the things, have some drawings on the floor and have it like physically that room be
Yeah,
a
I have a actually that's a project in the works, constellate across an entire three-dimensional space.
nice.
Because I started making a kind of a map of sort of an archipelago of how everything led to everything else. It's kind of wild to me. It is this sort of explosion and tangle and stuff. And so I'd love to work that out on walls because I'm going to remember, as in talking with you, I remember a lot that I'd forgotten. And I realized a lot. I recognized patterns that were not intentional patterns, but maybe subconsciously intentional. But I'm like, that was a really important pattern in the evolution of what we're doing. So I think you need a wall to, at least I need a wall to do that. I can't do it with thumbnails on a computer, for example. Yeah.
Yeah. No, certain types of things that are manual or need manipulation.
Yeah.
Is
Need masking tape. Needs to be masking taped.
masking taped.
Or like
But
gummy whatever the sticky thing.
the blue tack kind
Tack,
of.
blue tack.
Yep, yeah.
Copyright blue tack.
She actually is that you might not be able to see the detail of that, but she actually does have the left side is masking taped on because I never figure out the space properly. So I'm always drawing off the page. So I
Yeah.
had to like cut and like stick another piece of paper to be able to finish.
Oh, I understand that. I do that a lot. Sometimes I just cut off the part that didn't come out because I'm like, it wasn't meant to be. It wasn't part what needed to be there for the final. So I cut it off or tape things. I think masking tape is very important to the creative process, especially on a mental level. And I'm not even joking. And I think to kind of have a masking tape mentality, that things can always be masking taped, even if the final thing doesn't show the masking tape, perhaps. Our final books, there's a lot of masking tape just beyond the margins, metaphorical and literal masking tape.
It was just sparking something. I was trying to kind of connect it to maybe some of the themes that we've talked about, we've talked through, but the idea first of all, not always knowing where something is going. So you need the masking tape because it's not going to fit within the box, the confines of what you may have initially envisioned. It's going off in different directions, so you got to like tape it up. And also that idea that we don't always have all the means available, but somehow you
Right.
figure it out. You kind of MacGyver it.
And then in the end, it was like, oh, it had to be this way. I would just quickly mention that Katie Bentel and her magical house in the Polish countryside, which is the house where Green Writing, her book that we worked on for 2 years and published it for Board Wolves, she used this staircase actually. There are like steps leading up to the staircase, and then she uses kind of parts of the staircase and she builds her books. She puts everything that she's working on the staircase and the side of the staircase and the steps up from the living room floor. And it is an installation, and actually you could go it's like an exhibition, but it's evolving, and it's about layering, and it's about figuring, it's about assemblage, and then in the end it's the thing feels so natural, and she needs to see it on the staircase, and that makes total sense to me. So I would actually love to talk to folks about like where they assemble stuff, where that layering takes place. Especially when at the beginning you're like, I don't think I have enough to make something that's self-contained, and then in the end you do. But you need that space to kind of see that substantive accumulation.
Very cool. Well, if you have those conversations, I want to listen to them, obviously. Well, I don't know when you're going to fit those in, Stefan, but I leave that to you if you can find the
I
time.
did a conversation. I tried to channel you, and I did a conversation with Katie about her process, like
How could I do
48.
that?
It's on the Board Wolves Substack, which is I use it as an audio archive. That's where we put recordings of our poets, for example, reading from their Board Wolves books, including reading poems in like an original language in Turkish or Spanish or what have you, or Polish that we then translated. Katie and I sat down. I went to visit her, and we spoke for 48. It was 48 minutes. It felt like 24 minutes, to be honest, and just kind of we went through her whole her history making zines and evolution, which has inspired me deeply. And man, I loved it. And just like seeing also maybe some gently guiding, but also just kind of following. It went in places I didn't expect, and that was I want to do that more. I mean, I sort of do that. That's like the conversations I have, but to record those conversations, I think it's very important. I mean, your archive is just absolute treasure, and I love the patience of these. I love the patience of archives in general, but especially audio archives. And for example, the conversations that you lead with this podcast, they are evergreens. And I love just at any point, I'm like, don't waste, Stefan, don't waste the next half an hour, I don't know, dithering with something that doesn't really add anything to your understanding of being on this planet. Like just go to Vulnerability Life and Art archive and just pick something without even knowing, never having heard of the person, and press play. So I think it's really important. I think these audio archives are so important, especially because audio is, I think, the most generous of mediums in terms of the intimacy of it. I listen on my bulky headphones, and I learn so much. It calms me because I listen best when I'm not looking at a screen. That is something I want to start to do. I think even if I were to eventually one day not do books anymore, like let's just say that I would want to continue having these conversations about books and putting the conversations in archives, and you never know who will discover it. Some version of, the 19-year-old me in New York making these discoveries. Can I read one quotation just to finish?
Of course.
Also, because I've been doing more and more presentations on Board Wolves and sort of ethos, but also process. I tailor it depending on the context. So, for example, I'm going to be at the Conrad Festival here, which is one of the big literary festivals in Poland and Europe. I'll be giving a talk about publishing in Poland, but I've also done talks where about how I got going, or about serendipity and how one thing leads to another, and a lot of what we've been talking about. And I've started beginning every presentation with this quotation from Rilke. And this is his letters on Cézanne, where he went in 1907, he went like every single day for weeks, months to see these Cézanne paintings that were on exhibition. And he wrote letters to Clara Westhoff, who was his wife, who, I wonder about her receiving like, oh, he's writing about Cézanne again. But this is a collection of his letters. And it was given to me by one of my dearest friends, Lindsay Glass in Atlanta. And she gave me this book. And I read it, since I got it, I read it just endless cycles. It's always in my backpack. I finish and I start reading it again. And so I'm on like the 8th consecutive reading through. And there's one line that stands out, and he's talking about Rodin, about how Rodin doesn't stop to think about his work, but just keeps doing it, keeps going, and he doesn't care, just doing. And at the end of this letter, which he wrote June 28th, 1907, Rilke, he writes, basically, it's none of our business how somebody manages to grow. If only they do grow. If only we're on the trail of the law of our own growth. It's about right. Gauging one's growth relative to where one was. So when I'm looking back to when I was 19, so gauging the growth, but also seeing how it was a continuation. It's an evolution, but really a continuation. And sometimes in that also you can look back and be like, hey, when I was 19, I'm proud of my 19-year-old self. So yeah, with Board Wolves, and especially just, we spoke about kind of what I feel are my imperfections as a publisher and areas I need to improve to be on the trail of the law of my own growth as a publisher, as a poet, and as a friend, as a human being.
To learn more about Stefan and his journeys through poetry and publishing, check out episode 83 of this podcast, as well as boardwolves.com and @boardwolves on Instagram.